The chugging of the barge's engine mixes with the slapping ripples of the water as we inch our way along the Carrion River. Unsurprisingly, Marshal Vine was less than happy about the colonel's little coup to snatch Golder Finn, and Finn himself hadn't spoken a word to any of us since. The marshal had us geared up and shipped out to the Carrion decks within 6 hours, not even giving us time to get some sleep before we departed on our rescheduled supply hopper. 2 bumpy, turbulent hours eastward in the air, and we were out of the jungle. Then we were dropped down at the docks, where the Carrion River comes down from the Diablo Mountains, far to the east, and enters the jungle. I managed to snatch a couple hours at the wharfs while we waited for the barge to be readied. And then the colonel took us aboard, and we were off. That was 2 days ago. 2 days of dull, monotonous routine. There's barely room to swing a rat on board, and so we have to spend most of our time up on the deck or the roof in the fume-filled air. The barge is low and wide, with a reinforced hull rusted and stained by the polluted waters. The roof is coated in layer after layer of peeling protective paint, eaten away by the air itself. Luckily, Schaefer managed to commandeer us some rebreathers from Cerberus. But that doesn't stop the stinging in your eyes or the feeling of your skin being constantly etched away. The carrion itself is a sluggish, bubbling tar flow of chemical residuals, thick with streaks of green and red. I would have thought it was impossible for anything to survive in that toxic soup, but telltale bubbles betray the creatures beneath the surface. Now and then, I see vicious-looking, fin-backed lizards slipping into the murk from the banks, trailing after us for a few kilometers before deciding that none of us are going to fall overboard and provide them with a quick meal. The barge is captained by Hal Raquer. He is a wizened old man, his face shriveled to a husk by the elements, his skin almost black with ingrained grit and dust. With his 2 sons, he keeps the engine coaxed into life, shoveling raw, solidified sewage into the burner to keep it ticking over just enough to propel us along. There's little other traffic on the river that we've seen, although I've seen Imperial gun emplacements abandoned along the banks in places, and the corroding shells of tanks, APCs, and a few orc vehicles too. Now and then, there are contrails in the sky, high above us, left by Imperial interceptors or bombers, or maybe orc aircraft. It's pretty lazy going in comparison to the jungle, but we still have to keep a tight ration on food and water. Apparently, both are valuable commodities everywhere. The orcs have continuously attacked the water pumping stations far to the south, and according to Rakir, millions have died from dehydration in the hives, and whole regiments have deserted their positions looking for water. It's mid-afternoon, and I'm sitting up on the roof of the barge, as normal, near the front, playing cards with Brownie, Kin Drug, and the captain's eldest, Yed. The rounded prow bobs up and down through the water ahead of us, the wind blowing smoke from the exposed engines along the length, covering us in fumes. But the rebreathers keep the worst out of our lungs. There's frag all to actually bet with, but we make do with spent casings taken from the hold. Raker spends his time shifting through the desert, looking for anything that can be taken back to the forges and smelted down again. Apparently, metal is in pretty scarce supply too these days. It reminds me of the care taken to protect the transports and the convoy that brought us here. I'm sure you cheat, but can't see how, says he added, throwing up his hand with a grin. I scoop my winnings in a pile in front of me. I pick up one of the spent cartridges while Brownie shuffles the deck. How many of these you got on board? I ask. Nearly 2,000, says Yadid. 50 of them with a ration pack. 100 will get you half a charged power pack. 50 rations for a tab? I wish I kept all those we fired off in the jungle, says Brownie, passing the deck to for Yatta to cut. With a deft flip of his fingers, Dunmore brings the two halves back together and starts the deal. How many shells for the love of a good woman? He asks with a grin. Yatta smiles and taps the side of his nose. I know a good place, but take more than empty casings to buy affection, he says. Brownie's got nothing but empty casings anyway, laughs Kindrug, earning himself a punch on the arm. Why do you think he likes the biggest guns? He has to compensate somehow. I pick up my cards, keeping my face blank as I look at my abysmal hand. Brownie fidgets with his stake, toying with the casings with his left hand. He's got a good one, because every time he's bluffed so far, he's occupied himself with his right hand. Yaddis scratches his chin and takes a snort through the rebreather. He's going to fold. Kindrug, I haven't been able to read yet, but he's such a bad player. He hasn't got any consistency to base my observations on. Hey, I spent 2 years on garrison duty on Stygies. I had to learn something while I was there, and cards was the main attraction. Thinking about it, it was the gambling that got me in trouble eventually. A bet with a woman as a stake, and a bad loser for a sergeant. Funny how things repeat themselves. I fold. As the others throw in their stakes and start the betting, I glance over to the bank, a couple 100 meters to the starboard. The ash wastes of Armageddon stretch out to the horizon, bleak and virtually featureless. Around here, the ground's not even proper ash dunes, just tiny rocks and pebbles, kilometer after kilometer of flatness. I'd hate to get lost out there, because except for an hour each way at dusk and dawn, you can't even tell where the sun is. And I haven't even seen a star in the night sky since I got here. High-level smog covers the whole desolate planet. Doesn't stop it getting damn hot, though. I think pulling the collar as if to let some of the heat out. A trickle of warm sweat runs down my chest. Do you think Finn will ever come around? Asked Din Krug, tossing his hand. He's obviously smarter than Yadid, who doubles his bet. We'll have to see, is all I say. We'll have to see, is all I say. How come he stays down below all the time? Asks Brownie, matching Yada and raising his arm again. The bargeman grins viciously and then immediately matches the bet. Yeah, an outdoor man like him should enjoy all this fresh air, says Kindrug with a snort. He likes his open spaces, not to be so open, I tell them quietly. He's never been out of the jungle before. It's kind of creeping on him. He's not used to so much sky. Oh, great. Good one, Colonel, says Kindrug, pulling a stopper from his water bottle and taking a swig. Brownie lays down his cards, and Yada starts muttering some local dialect we can't understand. I'm pretty certain he's swearing his head off. I was sort of the same for a while, I say, pointing at Kindrug to shuffle and deal. I grew up in a hive, so I never really knew you could get distances more than 100 meters. Imagine how I felt when I was on the shuttle going up to orbit. I saw this massive hive that I only knew a tiny bit of dwindle to a little blob. Damn near pissed my pants. And I really never had seen the sky before, although my grandpa used to tell us what lay outside the hive. Well, Australia's kind of average, really, says Brownie. A lot of islands. So I pretty much, everyone grows up on the coast. I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks, not hearing waves nearby or smelling salt. Well, Kator's renowned for its grav shoot regiments because we pretty much live in the sky, says Kindrug. Gas harvesters mostly, a few suborbital cities. I'm the opposite from you, Cage. I never set foot on proper ground till I joined the guard. And I was born on a boat that runs on shit, says Yada. Let's talk more cards. Deal the cards. I win this time. Several more days' travel brings us to the intersection with the Carinvan Canal, a series of huge locks, 15 in total, over 2 kilometers, bring ships up 700 meters from the lowlands to the south. It's here that we part company with the Rakirs. We're due to meet with some kind of military transport, heading up the canal, which will take us onto Infernus Quay. After that, I've got no idea. The colonel didn't tell us any more. He obviously knows exactly where we're headed, but for some reason is reluctant to tell us. That worries me, because last time he was so cagey about a mission, it was because nobody would have believed it. I'm expecting something a bit like Rakir's barge, perhaps a bit more accommodation. But when Dawn reveals the transport pulling in the dock the next morning, I have to admit I'm a little bit more impressed. Over 200 meters long, the heavily armored barge cruises through the murky waters at speed, a bow wave foaming ahead. It leaves smaller vessels bobbling madly in its wake. Smoke billows from 3 exhaust stacks, the clanking of powerful engines clearly audible over the noise of the dock. 2 gun turrets jut out of her prow deck, each housing 2 large-bore cannon, and a third smaller gun is mounted on her rear. As she slows and pulls up to the wharf, a long metal gangplank hisses out on hydraulics, clanging down onto the ferrocrete. The colonel walks up and talks to one of the officers by the boarding ramp, signing something and then waving us on. We grab our kit bags, scrounge from the orc hunters before we left Cerberus, and jog on board. At the top, a corporal gives us a surly look and directs us to the lower deck. Heading down the stairwell, we find ourselves in a bunk room large enough for 100 men, with kit lockers down the length of the ship. The hull vibrates, even with the engines just ticking over, rattling bolts in their holes and causing tremors to run up my leg. This is a bit more like it, says Kindrug, dumping his bag on one of the upper bunks. Nice to have a bit of space, says Brownie, wandering to the far end. We stop as we hear the thumping of boots on the deck above. Lots of boots. Bugger, says Brownie, as a sergeant leads his squad down the steps, barking orders for them to sort themselves out. We drift down to the far end as 2 whole platoons file in. The last to arrive stand looking confused, looking for non-existent empty bunks. Then the colonel strides in, and all the guardsmen leap up from their lounging. He marches over to us. I hope you are not occupying bunks needed by proper soldiers, he says, nodding to the door through the next bulkhead. With a sinking feeling, I lead the last chancers through. Sure enough, there's an empty storeroom, or likely an ammo magazine. There's even shelving around on the walls. Not a bed in sight, not even a scrap of mattress or blanket. A single yellow glow globe illuminates the cramped chamber. It's dark, and below the waterline and the throbbing of the engines, the throbbing of the engines is even more powerful. It makes my teeth rattle. There's a constant sloshing of backwash against the hull as the barge rides as the river swells. Come on, last chancers, make yourselves comfortable, I snap. directing a venomous glance at the colonel's back as he steps out. The door swings shut behind him, and we hear the sound of the lock wheels squealing into place. I notice there's no wheel on the inside. Why would there be? Why would there be? It's a storeroom after all. It's not like cargo needs to let itself out. And that's all we are, human cargo. I will say that so much of the military banter is strictly just organized around innuendos. Innuendo banter is probably, I would say, the largest portion of the military would largely agree. The largest portion of the army would probably agree that it's the highest tier. The innuendo, the innuendoing, the innuendo humor window. Another day and a half, getting only brief exercise and 5 meal periods. Then the door opens again. Full kit, combat readiness, says the corporal who welcomed us aboard. Muster aft. As he turns sharply on his heel and marches away, we look at each other. Once we're up on deck, rebreathers in place, lasguns charged and ready to go, we find out what all the fuss is about. About half a kilometer down the river is Infernus Quay, a sprawling maze of ruined warehouses, docks, and factories. Smoke fills the sky, and the steady pounding of artillery can be heard from the southern shore, about 300 meters to our starboard. With a roar of jets, a flight of 3 attack planes scream overhead, rockets rippling out from pods slung under the wings. Detonations erupt a few hundred meters inside the quay's buildings. There are the constant sounds of small arms fire and grenades. Shells from orc guns explode along the quay and send up massive plumes of water from the river. Another transport barge, slightly smaller than the one we're on, takes a direct hit. Its stern is flung into the air, and propellers splinter and fly off. The men on board are plunged into the murky water. They struggle briefly before the corrosive soup eats through their uniforms and sucks them below. Half-ruined wharfs and piers jut into the Charian, swarming with guardsmen pouring off barges, lighters, and rickety old steamers. They surge forward into the ruins. As we close, I can see the black coats of commissars, chainswords waving the troops on, and I can just hear the shouts blending with the cacophony of battle, exhorting their men to the greatest efforts. The colonel appears, bolt pistol in hand, a newly acquired power sword hanging in a scabbard from his coat belt. He doesn't look at us. Instead, he fixes his attention on the mangled remnants of a pier about 200 meters away, evidently our destination. The other troops on board clump up the stairs onto the deck. And then it's that I realize how young and old most of them are. Some of them are barely old enough to shave, whilst others are thinning and graying hair. Their officer, a gangling lieutenant, moves along the line, checking weapons and packs. Behind the visor of his gas mask, I can see wide, scared eyes. The barge shudders as the engines are pulled in reverse, slowing us down for the approach to the pier. Looking out over the Infernus Quay, I can see that there are a few buildings more than 2 stories high. A half-ruined steeple of a shrine rears up near the center of the complex, the wing of a massive golden eagle hanging forlornly from its twisted brackets. The whole place is littered with rubble, burnt-out tanks and transports and piles of bodies. This doesn't look fun, mutters Brownie, standing just behind me. I ignore him, focusing my attention on the landing place as the metal gangway soars down, clanging against the twisted platform. The colonel turns and points at us, then heads off down the ramp. Come on, last chancers, time to die, I shout, breaking into a run. With my boots thudding on the metal walkway, I hurl myself down the boarding ramp at full tilt, following the colonel into a shattered office building just to our left. Glancing over my shoulder, I see Brownie following, the heavy stubber slung over one shoulder, and Erasmus running behind him with loops of ammo belt. Lori leaps across a pile of bricks and slams into the wall next to me, breathing hard. She glances out of the jagged frame of a window just behind me, lasgun held ready. The others follow quickly, taking up covering positions in this room and the one next door. I glance down at the rubble that we're crouched on and notice skeletal fingers protruding from underneath a twisted metal roofing beam. Putting it to the back of my mind, I scoot forward to kneel beside the colonel, who's peering out of a doorway to the front. The orcs hold the west quarter, he says, pointing off to the left. This is our counterattack to push them back. I want the heavy stubber up on that roof 200 meters down the road. Half the squad to the right, and the other with you circling to the left. I nod, point to Brownie, Erasmus, Kelth, and Ohebs. You're with the colonel, straight ahead. Don't slow down, I say. The rest of you, follow me. Without waiting for an acknowledgement, I put my head down and slide out of the door, keeping close to the wall. A squad of Armageddon Guard, gas masks on, trench coats flapping, crosses the street about 70 meters further on, and I head after them, running across the road into the building opposite. Finding myself in a large, corrugated metal warehouse, choked with smashed crates and splintered pallets, I head across, scrambling over the debris. Scuttling from building to building, we cover about 200 meters in the next few minutes. I'm breathing hard. My heart is hammering in my chest as I crouch at a corner, peering left and right. My whole body tense. Taking a deep breath, I force myself to relax and focus. There's sporadic fighting from our right, and the crump of mortar shells falling not far ahead. To our left, past the fallen archway, a Lehman Russ tank smokes fitfully, its tracks thrown, the turret dislodged from its ring. Ahead, a multi-story building has collapsed across the road, filling it with rubble and chunks of masonry. I duck back when I see a flitting movement just beyond the mound. Easing my head back around the corner, I look over the rubble, scanning to the left and right. I hear a barked order. It's obviously one of our squads. Come on, the colonel will be waiting, I say, heading forward at a jog, lasgun held in both hands. Reaching the pile of rubble, I drop to my stomach and pull myself forward, ignoring the scrapes and scratches from the jagged debris jutting through my fatigues. Reaching the crest, I see 3 mortar teams huddled behind a sandbag wall inside a large shell crater. Looking further ahead, I can see more movement, orcs massing a couple of half-demolished storehouses about 300 meters away. The mortars are laying down constant fire on their position, but it'll only be a matter of time before the orcs take their chances and head forwards. Scrambling over the rubble, bricks and crumbling mortar cascading down over my boots, I make my way over to the squad. Their sergeant glances around at the noise, las pistol ready, and then relaxes when he sees us. It's at that moment that I dearly wish he had a comms set to communicate or somehow find out what's going on. Looking down the street to the right, I can see the position of the others, the nose of the heavy stubber poking out from the large crack in the wall on the 3rd floor, the position covered from above by a slope of cracked roof. Wait here, I tell the others, and they fan out to cover on either side of the road. I run down the street towards the colonel, ducking instinctively as a shell screams overhead. It explodes on the far side of the block. Running down the ground floor, I see Ohebs by the the door, lasgun resting against the frame. Where's the colonel? I ask, as he jabs a thumb over his shoulder towards the next room. I walk through, and the colonel's there, talking to Kelth. He looks over at me. We're down the street, near the mortar battery, I tell him. There's a good number of orcs ahead and getting ready to attack. They'll be better off in front of the mortars. We'll be better off in front of the mortars to give them some protection. Very well, he says with a nod. This will be our fallback position if we need to retreat. Have your team secure the left side of the approach. We will be up shortly. I turn and start running back to Laurie and the others, hoping that the colonel gets a move on. It'll be over pretty quickly if the orcs advance on us before we have any support. Jumping down to the cracked plaster behind a wall, I glance ahead and look for the others. I point to a building across the junction and gesture for them to move up. As I do so, I see a couple of squads of guardsmen coming up to our position from the rear. I recognize their lieutenant from the barge, not wanting to exchange pleasantries. I head after the rest of the team before they get within walking distance, running at a crouch across the ruptured ferrocrete. What are they waiting for? Asks Kindrug, looking at the orcs. There's a fair few of them now. Under the bombardment from the mortars, splinters and shrapnel siding through the building and across the road. They're getting a pasting just sitting there. I shrug, not knowing the answer. I don't really care, as long as they hang on for a few more minutes. Ahead, and to the left, is a stairwell, leading up to the remnants of the floor above. I lead the others up, directing them to move along the level, which seems to stretch about 50 meters up the street. I poke my head out of a window, the glass crunching underfoot, to see what's going on. The sound of orcish chanting carries over to me, over the distant explosions and rattle of fire. They're definitely working themselves up for something. Any way up the far end? I ask Finn. He turns to me, face as white as snow, blinking slowly. He opens his mouth and then shuts it up again without saying a word. Come on, this is the urban jungle. It's just the same, only you've got rubble for undergrowth and walls for trees. Pull it together. He stares blankly at me for a couple seconds. Then recognition lights up in his eyes. He blinks a couple more times. No, he says finally. There's no way up on the far end unless they climb on each other's backs. I want you down there with grenades, ready in case they try to get beneath us, I tell him. Have you got that? He nods and turns away to be replaced by Laurie. You better see this, she says. Her expression makes my stomach knot. I follow her along a ledge that leads out to the remnants of a bridge that once crossed from this building to the opposite side of the road, some 10 meters away. The tangled wreckage of metal lies on the street below us. I can hear a loud rumbling, and creeping forward on my belly, stick my head out to look at the orc position. I can see them swarming through the buildings now, and it isn't that which is causing my heart to skip a beat. Grinding along the road is a huge armored vehicle, larger than a Lehman Russ. 3 turrets pointed at the mortar section down the road. Its iron rim wheels crush masonry and corpses underneath its weight as it rolls forward, oily smoke fuming from a cluster of exhaust stacks at its rear, filling the street with a reeking stench. Crude banners flap from flagpoles attached from its main turret. Battle Fortress! I turn and shout to the others. Glancing back, I see the orcs pressing in behind it, using its bulk for cover. A mortar shell lands just in front of it, kicking up chunks of ferrocrete that bounce harmlessly off its thick hull. The stutter of heavy bolters echoes from down the street as Brownie opens up, bullets zinging off the metallic beast and cutting through the orcs to either side. Hold your fire, I say, making myself relax my grip on my lasgun, massaging some life back into my hand. Finn, Kindrug, I want covering fire against the infantry when we attack. Lori, ready with grenades. She nods, pulling two from the pouches at her belt. Wait for my signal, I say, my voice an urgent hiss. And I see Finn crouching down, bringing his lasgun up to his shoulder. With a great belch of flame and smoke, the battle fortress's main guns open fire. A split second later, the wall of the building across the street explodes outward, and a shower of steel splinters and ferrocrete shards. The two secondary guns open up, raking the ground with large caliber shells, tearing more pockmarks into the road and surrounding buildings. Sitting in hatches thrown back, two orcs man heavy autoguns. Their statico firing interrupted frequently as the crude guns jam. The battle fortress rumbles to a stop just beneath us. Orcs move forward like a green wave breaking across a rock. The main gun fires again, and I can feel the pressure wave slapping across my face, only a couple meters above it. The sound makes my ears ring as it echoes off the inside of the half-ruined room. Let's do it! I shout over the din, bringing my lasgun and firing off shots at the nearest cupola. It swings the gun around towards me, and bullets rattle off the brickwork just below me, causing me to duck back. After the expected pause, when the weapon jams again, I lean out, this time putting two shots into the orc's head as it bends down, examining the breech of the gun. It slumps forward. All around me, the orcs are opening fire, a torrent of lasbolts tearing into the orcs that clamber around the immense vehicle. Fire from the others and another mortar salvo joins the attack. Heavy stubber and las fire cutting down half a dozen orcs. Their bodies are flung into the air by the detonation of mortar bombs. Dirt and limbs scatter across the road and the whole of the battle fortress. Firing off a few shots in rapid succession, I lean back out of harm's way and check on the others. Finn is throwing a grenade, underarm, into the room below us. It bounces off the twisted remnants of a metal stairway. The growling cries of wounded orcs follow the bang of grenades' detonations. Kindrug is snapping off shots to the left, right, and center, and I can already see a discarded power pack next to him. Each of those is good for 40 shots, so he's been busy. Lori's close by, crouched a couple meters behind me, waiting for my signal. A series of explosions ripples along the wall in front of me, and shards of ferrocrete fly inwards, grazing my face and tearing my arm. I look at Lori and give her the nod. Leaning back, I raked the second cupola with fire, only to discover the orc's already dead. Its finger tightened on the trigger, spraying bullets wildly into the air as the turret turns and flops to one side. Lori jumps past me, dropping down the meter and a half to the top of the battle fortress's roof. I sling my lasgun over my shoulder and follow. Keeping low, we scuttle to the two hatches, readying our grenades. Lasbolts skip off the armor in bright flashes, and bullets scream past within centimeters of my face. With another glance at each other, we each toss two frag grenades in. With a jumping run, I leap back, grabbing hold of a twisted bridge support jutting from the wall. Wrapping my legs around it, I reach up a hand, which Lori grabs, and I swing her up. Below us, we hurl ourselves behind the shattered wall. The grenades detonate. Below us, as we hurl ourselves behind the shattered wall, the grenades detonate. Shrapnel sighs through the interior of the battle fortress. The secondary guns fall silent, and the huge tank begins to lurch forward again. I guess the driver has either died at the controls or has decided it's better to just keep moving. The main gun booms out again, the shot sailing off into the distance, the gunner's aim spoiled by the sudden movement. If it gets away, it'll roll over the position at the end of the road with no trouble. Again? Asks Lori, and I nod, pulling another grenade from my belt. Kindrug, get your ass over here, and give me your grenades. The ex-grab shooter pulls back from the edge of the floor, where he's been firing down on the orcs, and legs it toward me, keeping his head down. I see that he's limping, blood streaming from his right leg. It's no bother, he says between gritted teeth, noticing the line of my gaze. He hands me a grenade and shifts. It's the only one I've got left. He makes his way back to his firing post and pulls his lasgun around. A second later, the ferrocrete explodes underneath him, and a whole section of the floor gives way with a crash and the screech of torn reinforcing rods. He's all right, though. I can hear him shouting and shooting. Finn glances down and then jumps over the edge after him. Looks like we're going downstairs, then, I say to Lori, scuttling out to the remnants of the bridge, and then leaping down onto the top of the battle fortress as it crawls forward. An orc sticks its head up through the nearest cupola, and I ram my boot into its face as Lori moves past. Headed for the front of the tank, I slam the hatch shut, and then drop to my stomach as a bullet grazes my left shoulder. Crawling forwards, I hang over the edge of the track guards. The clanking of wheels deafens me, and I see an air grill just to my left and smash it with the butt of my lasgun. Throwing the grenade inside, I leap away, flattening myself against the hull as the orcs around the tank fire up at us. Flames billow out of the exhausts, and my ears are suddenly torn apart by the shrieking of metal grinding on metal as gears topple off, and the engine is torn to shreds. The battle fortress slews to the left for a few seconds, crushing orcs beneath it, before crashing into a building and coming to a stop. Debris showers down around me, and I can't stop myself from grinning. It makes all those days spent on the ship with our mock tank worthwhile. The sound of a shell, much heavier than a mortar bomb, whines overhead, and a moment later the roar just behind the battle fortress erupts. The road just behind the battle fortress erupts, tossing orcs into the air and causing the immobilized tank to shudder. As the smoke clears, it reveals a deep crater. I can just imagine the forward observation officer's next words. Concealed somewhere around here, he'll be saying, "Fire for effect!" It's time to get the hell out of here. Lori has the same idea, keeping clear and disappearing into the building where Kindrug and Finn are. I imagine I hear the distant boom of artillery pieces, though I doubt it's true, as I jump down, stumbling over the orc bodies littering the road. "Run!" I scream at them, slapping Lori on the back to get her moving. Kindrug has one arm around Finn's shoulder. His trousers are soaked with blood from his injured leg. I grab the other arm, and between the two of us, we race towards the colonel's position. Bullets skip off the walls and whistle around us if we pull our heads down and sprint as best we can to the uneven surface. Hurling ourselves through a shattered window into the street, we pick ourselves up and start across the roadway. A second later, there's an immense series of detonations. The building explodes into dust under the artillery bombardment, and the shock wave hurls us from our feet again. For several seconds, the salvo continues, the floor shaking under the impacts, the air filled with choking smoke and dust. After the tumult dies down, it starts raining body parts. Green-skinned goblets of flesh and dark blood spattered down onto the street around us, ash sticking to the gore as it settles slowly. Kindrug pulls himself to a sitting position and looks back to where the street had stood. The buildings are now nothing more than a crater-pocked wasteland about 200 meters across. "Why couldn't they have done that 10 minutes ago?" he moans, grasping his leg tightly, spitting in blood. "Bloody artillery crews." "What? And have the infantry complain that they don't get any fun?" I say, mopping crap from my face with a dusty sleeve. I hear a trumpet in the distance, signaling a general advance, and within a minute, squad after squad of troops are pounding down the street to reoccupy the position the orcs were in. We sit there as the platoons march past us on the double, gazing around in astonishment. A shadow falls over me, and I look up to see the colonel silhouetted against the yellow sky. Where the hell did you fraggers come from? I say, pushing myself to my feet and picking up my las gun. It was good that we stalled the orc advance, he assures me, looking across now at the hundreds of men moving into place. I wonder. There are at least 2 companies here. I suspect less than a dozen last chancers would not have made much of a difference. Still, better to be busy than bored, I suppose. Hmm. Heading east across in Furnace Quay, we pass hastily rebuilt barricades and emplacements, and thousands of guardsmen digging in for the next orc assault. We take it in turns to help Kindrug. We steadily make our way up through the center of the complex to the higher ground to the east. There's a medical station about halfway up the slope of one of the hills, and we stop there to get treatment for Kindrug. Sitting him down, we all turn and gaze east and north towards the orc lines. You can easily see them out in the ash wastes, even a few kilometers away. The ground is swarming with them, huge mobs camped out in the harsh dunes, buggies and bikes roaring back and forth. The smoke from the fires and engines casts a pall for kilometers in every direction. As we watch, something draws our attention to the horizon. They start out as specks, and at first I think I'm imagining it. But as the orderlies come and take Kindrug, I stand there watching the distant shapes. As the minutes pass, they grow larger, changing from specks to blobs. To be able to see them at this distance, they must be immense. Gargants, says Finn, shielding his eyes from the glare. Massive war engines, larger than a warlord titan. 3 of them by the looks of it, plus a load of battle fortresses. The orcs on the plains seem to be content to wait for their reinforcements to arrive. There's a cry of pain from Kindrug inside the makeshift blood station. Nobody turns around. I look over the defenses arrayed against the orcs, from the batteries of cannons and howitzers on the far bank of the Carron. to the legion of troopers in and around the buildings themselves. All around on the hillside are the wounded, lying in lines along the sides of the road. The lucky ones have blankets to cover themselves from the burning sun, but most of them don't. A little way to our right, amongst the ruins of an old pumping station, dozens of men wearing the white armbands of signifying punishment duty are digging a massive hole for the piled bodies behind them. They must be at least there must be at least 200 corpses there, swarming with flies and rats. Luckily, the breeze is blowing the other way, so the stench isn't too bad. One of the orderlies comes out and stretches, his dark uniform crusted with dried blood. He notices us looking at the mass grave. That's just the ones we've sent out this morning, he says, rubbing a bloodied finger along his nose at an itch. There are 14 more medic stations around here. Well, there were. A couple of them got bombed by fighter bombers this morning. On average, we're losing about 1,500 men a day. When the orcs attack, that doubles, but on quiet days, we just have to worry about lung poisoning, infected rat bites, the usual stuff. We look down at the dockside and see more troop transports unloading their cargoes of new soldiers. There are so many of them, marching up the piers and disappearing into the ruins. A real meat grinder, eh? Says Brownie. It has been, says the orderly. He prefers a hand to each of us, which we shake. All except the colonel, that is, because he's disappeared off somewhere in the last few minutes. The name's Sizebra. I was with the 14 Vastan Armored Infantry. We're your last chancers, I tell him. He gives me a puzzled look. Penal troopers. Anyway, that doesn't matter. What do you want? What do you mean, was with? Where's your unit now? Well, with all the attacks and counterattacks, we're pretty much scattered all along the north bank of the Karen, as far as I can tell. I sort of ended up here, and it seemed there was plenty to do. And what did you mean it has been a real meat grinder? Asks Laurie, picking up on his earlier choice of words. Are you expecting it to stop soon? Seesbra looks at the orc horde stretching around in Furnace Quay. Last time they came in with just one gargant. They almost overran us in a few hours, he says. Luckily, we had orbital support back then. I hear it's needed elsewhere at the moment. Somewhere near Tartarus, I think. They've got 3 of them this time. I figure you guys turned up at a really bad time. Things are about to go from meat grinder to slaughterhouse tomorrow. I hear Brownie swearing under his breath, and Laurie's shaking her head. Kel slumps to the ground, burying his head in his hands between his knees. I turn to face Sizebra. So, what are you going to do? I ask him. Keep patching up the bits they throw at me. Then start using this, he says, pulling a bolt pistol out from the waistband of his fatigues. I figured the commissar who coughed up his lungs all over me the other day wouldn't need it. Kindrug comes out, hobbling badly, his face ashen. Your friend lost a lot of blood. Luckily got him here in time, says Sizebra. Any other time, I'd recommend keeping the weight off it for a few days. But that just ain't going to happen now, is it? The colonel reappears, a quartermaster sergeant trailing behind him. He glances at Kindrug's leg, and then looks at the rest of us. Grab your gear and move out, he says. There is a supply train back into the Diablo Mountains, and we are going to be on board. Kindrug, you will be staying here. Congratulations, you have survived the 13th Penal Legion. The trooper smiles for a moment, and then the expression turns to one of anger. Hold on. I'm not staying anywhere, he says, limping forward. I heard what you guys were talking about. I'll be dead within the day, I reckon. I'm sticking with you, Colonel. Nonsense, said Schaefer with a snort. We cannot possibly accommodate walking wounded on this mission. You will slow us down. I'll bloody well sprint if I have to, says Kindrug, lifting up his good leg and standing on the uninjured one to try to prove how strong he is. I said no. You are staying here, the colonel says, turning and walking away. I demand my redemption, Kindrug calls after him. When the colonel turns around and he continues, Die or succeed, you said. They're the only ways I have of redeeming myself. In the eye of the Emperor, you said. Well, the mission's not over, and I'm pretty damn sure that if I was dead, I wouldn't be looking at this bunch of ugly wasters. So I demand you take me with you. Colonel stares at him for a long while, and I expect him to reach for his pistol and blow his brains out. He'd be dead and redeemed. It's just the sort of thing the colonel would do. He gives a depressed shake of his head and then looks at me. Cage, if this man falls behind, no one goes back for him, he says, before stalking off. Too bloody right, mutters Brownie, stomping off after the colonel. The others follow, leaving Kindrug standing there, watching them go. What are you waiting for? I snap at them as he flinches. On the double, move out. He hobbles off as fast as he can, my laughter following him every painful step. When the colonel said we were traveling on supply locomotive, I had been expecting some rickety old steam engine. The reality is very different. The glistening black armor is scuffed and dented in places and covered in ash, but the 6 carriages and engine look pretty impregnable at first glance. About 3 times higher than I am tall, the 10-meter-long armored compartments are each protected by anti-aircraft cupolas and twin multi-lasers, while the carriage behind the engine boasts a modified tank turret. Climbing up the ladder into the central wagon, I note the thick armor plating spaced a little way off the carriage sides. Inside, it's sparse, though. It is still a supply train, after all. There are no windows, and as the crew slammed the doors shut, we're plunged into darkness. We sit ourselves down on the reinforced steel floor, feeling something gritty underfoot. I don't know what it was delivering, but there's still some of its previous cargo scattered across the floor. The train shudders as the engines growl into life, and a fitful light emanates from the glow globe in the ceiling. At each end, hammock footholds are set under the wall to allow access to the cupolas above. I pull myself up and open the hatch, allowing more light to spill in. Dragging myself up to look out the roof, I see the tracks stretching ahead of us, up into the mountains. Check the other gun, Dunmore, I call down, pulling the securing catch free on the multi-lasers in front of me. Setting myself against the edge of the hatch, I swing the guns left and right along the rail. We've got a good traverse, moving around the 3/4 of a circle to the front and sides. The elevation is good, almost going up to the vertical, although the size of the wagons themselves mean that they're little use for clearing the ground unless the target's a few hundred meters away. Hearing the other hatch open, I glance around my shoulder to see Brownie pulling himself up. Turning my attention back to the guns, I press the power-up switch and read the charge meter. Both power packs are almost full, which is good. Overall, everything seems to be in good order. Stowing the multi-lasers back in their lock position, I take the opportunity to have a look around. We're already traveling at some speed, rocking gently side to side along the track, accompanied by the rhythmic clattering of the wheels. To the right, the cairn is disappearing behind the ash dunes. And turning around, I see smoke-shrouded buildings of Infernus Quay are already a few hundred kilometers behind us. To my left, the ash wastes of Armageddon stretch out, kilometer after kilometer of barren wastes, as far as I can see. All in all, it could be worse. I'm glad I'm not marching across those lifeless tracts. As night closes in, I give word to break out our rations. I realize that we left most of the kit on the barge in the colonel's eagerness to get into the fighting. It's just what we've got in the pouches on our belts, probably enough food and water for 3 days. I hope that it's either a short journey or the colonel has made other plans. I'm already I've already had enough of being hungry and thirsty. Gnawing on a piece of bland dried meat substitute, I take a swig from my canteen to soften the rations. So what's the deal with you then? I say, looking at Gideon Ohebs. His face looks even more thin and pinched than normal in the dim yellow glow of the compartment, the shadows dark in his sunken cheeks. Nothing special, he says, tearing a chunk out of the ration bar and stuffing it into his mouth. Come on, says Brownie. It's been a year now, and we hardly know anything about you. So come on, Gideon. What have you got? What got you to the last chancers? I'd rather not talk about it, he says, gazing down at the floor and fiddling with the rations wrapper. All right, then. We'll ask Laurie, I say. Don't drag me into this. I'm not going to talk as if he isn't here. It can't be anything as bad as we're imagining, I say, focusing on Ohebs again. I walk over and sit next to him. Just leave the guy alone, says Finn. If he doesn't want to talk, he doesn't have to. You're just pissed because the colonel got you good and proper, says Kindrug. Like any of you volunteered, replies the orc hunter, tossing his crumpled up wrapper at Kindrug. I'm sure you were all queuing up for the penal legions. Some of us had a choice, says Brownie, looking at Laurie. So what's with that, huh? Did you miss your old mate Cage too much? She gives a venomous stare. Who's got the cards? I say, trying to break the uneasy silence. Don't change the subject, says Kindrug, between slurping chews of his rations. Tell us, Laurie. Tell us what the hell you were thinking when you signed back on with Schaefer. It's none of your emperor damn business, she says, giving them each a glare. I have my reasons, and that's all you need to know. I think we deserve more than that, says Brownie. You too, Gideon. If I'm putting my ass on the line for you in a firefight, I want to know who I'm with. The rest of them, I know, but you two are a mystery. How do we know you're not going to bug out in the middle of a scrap? Lori pushes herself to her feet and walks towards Brownie, who hurriedly stands up, his arms raised to defend himself. She stands right in front of him, eyeballing him. I can look after myself. No need to make sacrifices on my account, she says, and I can't help noticing the emphasis on the word sacrifice. In fact, I'd feel safer knowing I wasn't relying on you. Is that so? Says Brownie, bristling with anger. And why would that be? You're a show-off, says Laurie, crossing her arms and leaning back on her heels. She glances back over at the heavy stubber stowed in the corner. Without your big guns, you're nothing, are you? Kindrug stands up next to Brownie, sneering. And what's so special about you? Says the drop trooper. Apart from being a white-skinned freak, obviously. Oh, frag. He had to go and say something like that, didn't he? I launched myself to my feet in an instant, throwing myself in front of Laurie. My right fist cracked straight into Kindrug's jaw, the sudden blow knocking him to the floor. Back off, everyone, I snapped, shoving Brownie back a step. Anyone here want to pick a fight with me? Kindrug scrambles to his feet, hands balled in fists, but I dart him a look, and he stops in his tracks. Back down, I say to him, my voice quiet. Behind me, I hear Laurie snort and walks to the far end of the compartment, glancing over my shoulder. I see her slumped down against the wall, eyes closed. What the hell did you do that for? Hisses Kindrug, rubbing his jaw. You'll have a bruise, nothing more, I tell him. Count yourself lucky I didn't let Lori have a go at you. She's not that tough, he says, puffing his chest. Yes, she is, I tell him. I don't need any more corpses at the moment, so don't start throwing yourself. So don't start throwing around words like freak, okay? He sees the sincerity in my eyes and opens his mouth to say something, but then shuts up. It's the first sensible thing he's done in the last 5 minutes. With an exaggerated shrug, he steps back and sits down, his gaze avoiding everyone else. And you, I say, turning on Brownie, you just keep your mouth shut before someone here puts their fist in it. He nods and looks down at his feet. I take a couple steps back so I can look at all of them. Kalth is sitting in the corner, eyes closed, apparently meditating or something. Ohabs is just sitting quietly, toying with the rations wrapper, folding it and unfolding it. Next to him, Finn has a knife and whetstone out, slowly sharpening the blade with smooth, gentle motions. The others are looking at me, trying to guess what I'll do next. Listen up, I say, raising my voice. I don't know what the Colonel has in store for us, but you can believe that it won't be pretty, and it certainly won't be easy. There will be enough fighting and dying to be done before we see this thing out. We haven't got the luxury of doing the orcs' job for them. I don't give a rat's ass if you hate each other's guts. Hell, I despise most of you myself. That isn't the point. You're still fragging soldiers. You're still damn well fighting for the Emperor. The next one of you to step out of line will have more than a sore jaw to worry about. You're damn lucky the Colonel isn't here to see you squabbling like kids. He'd probably shoot one of you, just to show he's not to be messed with. And I wouldn't blame him. We are going to be in the cack again pretty damn soon, so stay sharp, because the moment one of you misses a trick, we could all be dead. Lecture over, I pick a spot along one of the walls, pull off my jacket, and ball it into a pillow. I lie down, closing my eyes. Soldiers always need to let off steam now and then, in particular after they've been in action. It won't be the last time, I reckon. With any luck, they'll soon be busy fighting for their lives. Whatever happens next, I figure there's no sense in losing sleep over it. The screeching of brakes wakes me instantly, and I can feel it slowing rapidly. Pushing myself to my feet, I throw on my jacket, grab my lasgun from the floor, and step over to the compartment doors. The others are stirring too. Finn's on his feet already. Lori's reaching out for her weapon. Feeling us shudder to a halt, and the jolt unbalancing me for a moment, I grab the door lock lever and pull, sliding the door open. Bright light from lamps all along the side of the train floods in, painful after the gloom of the wagon. Shielding my eyes against the glare, I jump down to the ground, feeling rocky scree underfoot. Looking around, I see that we're heading up some kind of wide defile. 10 to 15 meter high cliffs, punctuated by gullies and caves on either side. Silhouetted against the lights, I see other figures emerging up near the engine. Lori's next out, instantly alert, scanning the top of the nearest cliff for signs of movement. Finn and Brownie follow soon after, Brownie turning to take his heavy stubber from Kindrug, who lowers it out of the compartment. The drop trooper helps Erasmus down, coils of belt fed in his arms. Finn ducks between the large wheels and heads under the train, and I motion for Lori to go with him. As the others scramble out, Kelth brings up the rear with the plasma pistol with a las pistol drawn. I head off towards the front of the train. The colonel meets me a couple carriages along, bolt pistol drawn, power sword glowing in his hand. His face betrays nothing of what's happening. There's a blockage on the rail ahead, he says. Boulders across the track. It could be some kind of ambush. Sergeant Manners and his squad will protect the crew and identify the crew clearing the tracks. I want you to lead the team up onto the cliffs to give them cover and support. I will take Dunmore, Kindrug, Ohebs, and Spooge to the left. The others go with you. How long do you reckon it'll be, sir? I ask. And he replies with a shake of his head. I am not sure, he says, glancing over his shoulder as a work crew with picks and shovels jump off the wagon behind the engine and head along the track. An hour at least, I think. Calling out orders, I head back to the others. The colonel's team hurries past me to join Schaefer. 2 main teams, 1 to file each, I say. Kelth and Finn, Laurie and me. You two, take that gully to the left. We'll go further up the track. Watching them head across the rocky ground to the defile, I head forwards, Laurie just behind me. Getting to the front of the train, I see that the track is well and truly blocked. Starkly lit by searchlights on top of the engine, a pile of boulders as tall as me lies across the track and spills out several meters to either side. Workmen are already crawling over the heap, pulling free smaller rocks and tossing them clear. Just ahead and fanned out to the left and right are men of Sergeant Manners' contingent, taking up some positions along the foot of the cliffs and behind the boulders. That's deliberate, says Laurie, looking at the obstruction. If it wasn't a natural rockfall, surely it would have spilled off down to one side of the gorge. All the more reason to get up position quick, then, I say, searching for some new way up the cliff. About 20 meters ahead of the train, the canyon wall shallows. Oh, okay. About 20 meters ahead of the train, the canyon wall shallows, and I can see what looks like a natural trench running back up the slope. I head for it, my eyes adjusting slowly when we're out of the lights and of the pre-dawn gloom. Just before sunrise, it is a perfect time to attack. I check the safety on my lasgun. It is on, before slinging it across my shoulder. It's not too difficult to climb up the crack and the rock. There are plenty of handholds, and it's only a matter of minutes until I'm wedged into the crevice. Pulling my lasgun free, I crawl forwards, ducking under a natural arch of rock into a short tunnel and then out to a low gully. I guess this used to be a bed of steam carved to the rock thousands of years ago, before the industrialization of Armageddon and the exhaustion of the water supplies, except for the polar ice caps. Remarkably, there's still a few scrubby, thorny bushes along the gully's edge, and it's then I notice the air is a little easier to breathe, although it gets thin at this altitude. I guess the crap that's in the air either rises up to form the permanent cloud layer or settles as smog on the ground. There's quite a strong wind, blowing straight into my face. Dust gets in my eyes and down the front of my jacket. The night is cool and crisp, and there's not a shed of moonlight. The glow from the train's lights doesn't extend very far past the cliff edge, and in front of us is a huge expanse of darkness. I crawl forward on my belly, eyes scanning for any sign of an enemy. Looking over my shoulder, I see Laurie emerging from the crevice with a wave of my hand and send her a little way off to the right. Turning to make as little noise as possible, I crawl to the left, lasgun held out in front of me, until I see a large boulder sticking up out of the ground. A stubby little tree clings to existence in the lee of the rock. I rise to my feet and scuttle over, taking cover in the shadow of the boulder, looking out from the canyon wall. Now that my eyes have adjusted, I can see that we're in the valley between two peaks, a pass into the heart of the Diablo Mountains. There's cover everywhere. The valley is cut into meandering gullies and dotted with boulders. Too much cover for my liking. Any enemy could be right on top of us before we'd noticed. We don't wait long before the orcs make their move. 100 meters to our right, there's a bright flash as Finn opens up with his lasgun, the bolt flaring off the rocks ahead of us. He fires again, and now Kelth joins in with his las pistol. And in the brief moment of illumination, I can see shapes moving through the rocks, running from shadow to shadow. There's no return fire, which is puzzling, and I bring my lasgun up to my shoulder and scan across the ground ahead of me. There are fuzzy after images flashing across my eyes, and I can't see a damn thing. Thinking it's better to do something than nothing, I swivel around on my belly until I can see where Finn and Kelth are firing. The orcs are in amongst the rocky area of scrub, ducking down behind the boulders, running from one to the next. I pick a likely-looking patch of shadow and fire. The flash of the las bolts illuminates something just to my left, about 10 meters away. It's an orc face, emerging from a hole in the ground. "Enemy to the left!" I roar, bringing my lasgun around, but the orc is up and running at me. Greetings. Red power. Red power. It lopes toward me, and I pull the trigger, but my reflex shot goes wide. Okay, look, the battle thing happens. And the battle thing even bores me, to be honest, because it's just like a grocery list. Okay. Okay, the battle happened. For the next half hour or so, we stay there, firing the occasional shot as an orc head appears out of the gloom. I can hear las fire echoing along the canyon, so I know that we're not the only ones under attack. It's a tense time because I haven't got a clue whether the orcs have got another way down into the canyon or whether they're about to work out their way out behind us and chop us into a bloody pulp. I don't know if Schaefer's still alive, though I suspect he is, or if anyone else is dead or wounded. Most of all, I don't know how long I'm going to have to stand in this fragging gully, the chill biting through my fatigues. The first glowing touch of dawn starts to spread across the clouds ahead, but too little to improve visibility. I figure the orcs know that they've got to push ahead now, or they'll stand no chance in the light. I tighten my grip, blink a couple of times to clear the dust from my eyes, and get ready. In the sudden quiet, I can hear the shouting of the train crew, the wind stirring up dust devils and rustling through the scattering thorn bushes. I can hear Laurie's shallow, steady breathing next to me and feel the body heat. Waves of heat emanate from the open wounds across Laurie's chest as bright red blood spills across her white skin. The blood is as hot as lava as it flows and settles under her breasts and leaks down the sides of her gnashed stomach. Like the heat of a volcano, her heart continues to throb inside her, spilling the crimson heat from within her shattered ribs. Her pale flesh is like ice, steaming and hissing as the blood flows across it. A heat haze shimmering into the air. Laurie's looking at me funny. It's only then that I realize that I'm holding my knife and my lasgun is on the ground. I don't remember turning around. "What are you doing?" she says, staring at me with suspicion. I look at her dumbly and then sheathe the knife without answering. Picking up my lasgun, I hear an echoing cry from the canyon, calling us back to the train. "You go first, I'll go rear guard." I say. She hesitates, looking at me in an odd way, before turning and worming her way back down the gully. Hearing the echo of her passing through the archway, seeing nothing of the orcs ahead, I turn and follow her, squeezing back down the defile and out into the cliff face. As I climb down the rocks, I keep glancing up, expecting to see orc faces, leering at me from the gully, ready to leap down on top of me. No such thing happens, and I reach the ground safely. The track's cleared. The rocks are now in a couple of piles to either side of the track. I see the colonel and his team working their way down the cliff on the opposite side, and I walk back to our carriage, a few meters behind Lori. I stop as something occurs to me. I turn to look at the piles of rocks again, and I grin to myself as I come up with something special for the orcs the next time they try blocking the rail. Hey, Lori, I call out, and she stops and turns. Give me your grenade. She walks back and hands it over, a questioning look on her face. I give her a nod to follow me as I walk over to the nearest rock pile. I hand her my lasgun so that both my hands are free. Pulling the pin on the grenade, but without letting the spring clip come free, I lift one of the rocks and wedge the grenade into the gap underneath, using the weight of the rock to hold the clip in place. I repeat this with the other pile and the last grenade from my belt, and turn around smiling. Let's see how much they like grenades after today, shall we? I say, dusting my hands off with satisfaction. She walks back and hands it over, a questioning look on her face. I give her a nod and to follow me as I walk to the nearest rock pile. As the train starts moving off again, and the wagon begins to sway side to side under the motion, I notice that Finn has a particularly smug look. What are you so happy about? I ask him, sitting down with my back to the wall. The others have done likewise around me. Nothing special, he says, still smiling. Just always happy to be killing orcs. How come these had no guns then? Asks Brownie. It was like being back on a firing range, them running about, taking them down without a shot in return. Well, the orcs up here are firsters, explains Finn, pulling out his knife and running through the whetstone along the edge. They've gone really feral. There's nothing up here for them to scavenge, except what we bring up ourselves, and there's few enough people up here anyways. Knives, cleavers, and their fangs, that's what they rely on. Doesn't make them any less dangerous, though. Like them back in the jungle, they've got natural cunning to make up for it. Doesn't surprise me, them springing a trap like that. You see, most folks think orcs are just plain stupid. Not my experience. They can't think things out like you and me, that's for sure. That doesn't make them dumb. You seem to know a lot about orcs, says Kindrug, nursing his injured leg. Been fighting them all my life, says Finn. You learn a thing or two about your enemy after 30 years. That's for sure. My father fought them in the first invasion before me, and passed on a thing or two he'd learned. You're still fighting the remnants and descendants of an attack 50 years ago, says Lori. She pulls a rag out of her pocket and starts cleaning the dust from the lasgun. What makes you think you'll ever drive them out or get rid of them? Never said we would, did I? Says Finn, with a grim smile. Once you've got that many orcs planet-side, I reckon you'll never get rid of them completely. You can hunt them down, burn the bodies from here to the world's end, but there'll always be a few left, and that's all it takes to start a new breeding. And then you've got a problem again before your sons are grown up. So, what do they want here anyway? Asks Kelth. He looks drawn and tired, his robes tattered and stained and dusty. Who cares? Says Kindrug. What do they ever want? They're interplanetary vermin. It's like going to a cheap whore. Once you've been, it's like going to a cheap whore. Once you've been, you might never cure the consequences. I reckon they know Gazgul's back, says Ohebs, and we all turn to look at him. He hardly ever speaks. I think it's the first time he's ever volunteered information. We glance at him expectantly, and suddenly, self-conscious, he looks down, occupying himself with his bootlaces. Well, then, I say, when it becomes obvious he's not going to say anything else. He looks up at me and the others, uncertain. It's just a theory, he says, his voice subdued. He pauses, obviously gearing himself up for an explanation. Orcs never know when to give up, do they? You shoot them, they retreat, regroup, and come back again. The last time Gazgul came, Commissar Yarrick kicked his ass good and proper, with the help of Commander Dante, of course. That was one of the first things that happened. The Orc Hunter thinks about it for a moment before replying. Well, obviously, there was the space battles, but in terms of the ground assault, I guess that was when the rock forts came down, he says. Big asteroids, hollowed out and protected with force fields, like mobile bases with engines fitted. Yeah, we know what they are, says Kindrug, shaking his head with bitterness. Why the hell do you think we decided to drop in on the jungle and say hello? And when the fortresses were coming down, the orcs dropped a huge, great big asteroid on Hades Hive, yes? Says Ohebs. He doesn't wait for confirmation. Haven't got his head full of steam now. Hades is where Yarick held out last time. Hades is where Yarick held out last time, giving the Space Marines enough time for their counterattack. So what does Gazgul do this time? Flattens it completely, wiping it in one go to make sure that it doesn't happen again. We all sit digesting this for a while. So you mean to say we got dragged across the galaxy for Emperor knows what? Because some orc warlord's pissed off and wants to get his own back? Says Brownie. Could be, says Ohebs. Just why the hell are we here anyway? Says Kindrug. There are millions, tens of millions of Guard and Space Marines on Armageddon. What the hell is Schaefer expecting us to achieve? Nothing none of them the rest can do, I say, scratching at my belly. Sand and dust got in under my clothes while I was crawling about outside, and now I've got itches in dozens of places. Something Space Marines can't do? Asks Finn, in disbelief obvious on his tone. I can't imagine that. Perhaps it's something the Space Marines won't do, says Lori. She looks at me with a pointed expression. Remember Court Norm, Cage? Course I do, I say. What a stupid question. A handful of last chancers and a city to destroy. 4 people got out alive. 2 of them are in this wagon. Nobody else could have done it. So we're heading east, right? Says Brownie. What's so important to the east? For all I know, it could be something in the mountains or on the other side of the planet, I say. Look, the Colonel will tell us in good time when he's ready. It's not going to be anything we can think of, I'm sure of that. Better off not wasting time dwelling on it. So, where's this Court Norm place? Asks Kindrug. Nowhere, Lori says quietly. It isn't anywhere anymore. Not even a pile of ash to remember to mark the spot. She has a faraway look in her eye, and I know exactly what she's thinking about. She's thinking about her twin brother's blood splashing across her face, his head blown apart. I wonder again just why it is she decided to come back. Surely she'd be better off burying the memories as far away from the Colonel as possible, or perhaps not. It's been over 2 years since that mission, and in that time, I've seen more blood, more killing, and suddenly, Court Norum doesn't seem so bad after all. Perhaps if she drives into a sea of blood, she'll no longer be able to tell if it's Lawrence or not. Whatever she's after, I'm glad she's here all the same. It's good to know that at least one other person, other than the Colonel, has some idea what might be in store. I don't think about that anymore. I just take each day as it comes, each battle, each firefight, just as the latest in a long line that stretches out until the end of my life. Nothing's going to change that now, so there's no point in fretting about it. In a week, in a day, in an hour, I could be dead. It doesn't matter. Even High Lords die eventually, I guess. If I get another hour, another day, another week, well, that's fine with me. When you're in my position, it doesn't matter what you can do and can't do with your life. It's just enough to be alive. Codet Nordum. Codet Nordum. Codet Nordum. Codet Nordum. We spend another 2 days rattling around in that wagon before we finally come to a stop. Stiff and tired, we jump out of the train to find ourselves in a marshalling yard on the slopes of a mountain. Rickety, temporary looking sheds and storehouses line the track, watched over by a high tower with skyward pointing. Beyond is a mass of scattered buildings, their skeletal ruins rising up against the dusk, tar and dust covered slopes beyond. Not far on, the rail track comes on with an abrupt end as it disappears into a crater several hundred meters across. The rock has fused in strange organic shapes from some immensely hot detonation. The mountains are obscured just a few hundred meters behind it higher up, slopes by a thick layer of cloud. It has a dirty reddish tint to it, clinging to the mountainsides. I make a silent plea to the Emperor that we don't have to go up the deadly-looking smog. The place is half deserted. A few men are hurrying around, swathed in robes and scarves, to ward away the chill mountain air. Without a word, the colonel leads us between the mountains, heading uphill. Where the hell are we now? Asks Brownie, gazing around at the empty buildings. I think it's Diablo's Forge, says Erasmus, staggering along with the heavy stubber ammo under one arm and a servo skull under the other. And what's Diablos? Says the Kin Drug. Looks like the end of nowhere to me. It's where I wanted to be stationed on my arrival, Erasmus says quietly. It's a departmental minitorium outpost, set up during the Second Armageddon War. As you can see, it's very low priority now. The mine has been abandoned since the last invasion, so there's not much to protect anymore. You mean you knew we were coming here and you didn't say anything? I ask, rounding on Spooge. Why didn't you tell us? Was I supposed to have told you? He says, cringing back from me. When did anyone ask me? And how was I supposed to know you were all coming here too? Just ignore him, says Brownie, wrapping an arm around Erasmus's shoulders and skin, seeming even darker against the pallid neck of the scribe. Since when have you two been friends? I say, taken aback by the show of support. It's not like Spooge is really one of us. He's just been tagging along because he's had nowhere else to go. Raz is here. Razzie here's the best damn loader I've ever had, says Brownie, patting the scribe on his head. Not a belt jam yet, have we, mate? Razzie, I say, trying not to laugh. Well, Erasmus is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Says Brownie. And so's Spooge. I like Razzie. Well, you better start saying your fond farewells, I say with a snarl. It's the end of the line for Razzie, and I bet we're not going to be hanging around any longer than necessary. I quicken my stride and walk ahead. Brownie's gone soft on the head, worrying about a damn scribe. He'll be glad to be rid of him once the serious fighting starts. I've had pretty desperate company in the past, but this group are really starting to wind me up. Kel's a stuck-up navigator who's just as keen to crawl into a hole as fire a gun. Emperor knows what's going on in Lori's head, and I've got a gut feeling there's something going to crack before the mission's over. I can't stand to be within 5 meters of Ohebs, and he makes me feel physically nauseous. Finn's scared of the bloody sky, and Kindrug is a loudmouth with a quick temper. I'd happily trade them in for the team we had in Typhos Prime, even for Cronin, who was utterly insane and could only speak in litanies and ecclesiarchical teachings. The colonel takes us to a large, low building just outside the railhead itself. and we follow him inside the small, bare chamber. There are no windows, and and the other door leading in. The only feature is another scuffed steel door at the other end. Make yourselves comfortable, he says, and we slump down against the wall. We have recently suffered some setbacks, says the colonel, slowly pacing back and forth in front of us. However, we have overcome these, and now the mission is ready to proceed as originally planned. I was expected It was expected that there would be losses, but now the success or failure of our mission depends solely upon your abilities and determination. You have fought well so far, but it is not your fighting skills that have ever been in doubt. The road ahead will test your resolve and your discipline, and many of you will fail. The reward is the same as it has always been, the chance for absolution through the success or death of this mission. There are no other alternatives. He stops and looks at us, eyeing each of us in turn and weighing us up. It might be my imagination, but it seems his gaze lingers on me for longer than the others. You are all wondering just what it was that a few can do in a war that has killed millions, he says, resuming his pacing, hands clasped behind his back. The status of Armageddon is finally poised. A shift in power either way may yet decide the fate of the planet. Victory on Armageddon is more than just a strategic necessity. It is also a spiritual and moral test. If the forces of the Emperor cannot prevail here, where we are in such strength, then what hope is there for those worlds far from Terra, out on the eastern fringe and on the far-flung stars? The Imperium needs hope. He needs hope now more than ever, because enemies surround us on all sides. This is a test of our fortitude that we have not seen the likes of for hundreds of years. If Armageddon can endure, then the realm of the immortal Emperor can also endure. His eyes shine as he speaks. He gazes over our heads, through the wall, and into the galaxy beyond. His voice rings with faith, assurance, and authority. Once again, I'm struck by how strongly he believes. His faith in the Emperor, in the Imperium, and in himself provides him with his invulnerability, like a physical shield. Despite what he's done to us, and to me in particular, I have to admire his conviction. He has never failed, never. The reason for that is simple. He's never even considered it a possibility. Whatever he sets out to do, he does without a moment of doubt. Our mission here is simple, and yet the consequences of what we will do will reach out beyond this world, out beyond this system, into the farthest reaches of the glorious Imperium. He pauses for a moment, head bowed, before continuing. Armageddon, and our victory here will shine like a beacon, reminding those who doubt that the Imperium still fights on that mankind. The Imperium still fights on, that mankind has not yet laid rest to its claim to the galaxy. Such a victory could well depend upon one man. One man could hold the key to winning the third Armageddon war. He walks close, passing along the line just out of arm's reach, gauging us again. That man is Imperial Commander Hermann von Straub, he says, and we are here to either rescue him or kill him. We take this news in silence for the moment until Brownie raises his hand. Yes, Dunmore, says the colonel, standing in front of him. Rescue or kill, says Brownie. Kind of opposite ends of a piece of string, aren't they? Which is it? The colonel coughs, clearing his throat, and then walks back to the other side of the room. He pulls his map from his pocket and opens it up, spreading it across the bare floor. He motions for us to gather around. We are here in the Diablo Mountains, he says, drawing a circle on the map with his fingers. His finger moves quite a distance. Von Strab is here, and Archon Hive. But I thought Archon was declared Purgatus, says Lori, kneeling down beside the colonel. Hasn't it fallen to the orcs? That is the first part of our mission, says Schaefer. We must determine if Archon is irretrievably lost to the enemy. Part of that task will be to determine the loyalties of Von Strab. He's turned traitor, says Finn with a growl. He disappeared after the last war and led Ghazghkull back 3 years later. Archon's his now, from what I hear. He even has orcs fighting for him. The reality may not be that simple, says the colonel, sitting back. It is suspected that those orcs are just as likely to be enforcing Ghazghkull's will on Von Strab as the other way around. Archon Hive is being held hostage, in effect, forcing Von Strab to comply. There is evidence that the former overlord has indeed provided intelligence information to Ghazghkull and his warlords. However, the latest news from our agents inside Archon say Von Strab has begun to recruit what he calls the Army for the Liberation of Armageddon. It is unsure what he intends to do with this army. It may be that he intends to use it to overthrow Orc domination of Archon, in which case we will assist him in whatever way we can before extracting him to safety. And if it's not that, I ask, if the army of the liberation of Armageddon is a counter-imperial militia, then we will kill Von Strab, says the colonel. The military importance of such a traitor army and the moral damage it would do to our resistance against the orcs would swing the balance of power in Armageddon. Von Strab still commands great respect and loyalty amongst the local nobility, some of the Hive rulers, and even senior military officers. If we discover that he is not acting under duress, then we will have orders to remove him by any means necessary. He cannot be allowed to stand as a figurehead for anti-imperial sentiment. So what was the original plan? I ask. You obviously don't mean for us to crash in the jungle. How do we get to Arkham? We walk, says the colonel. There's a disused pipeline from this mine that leads across the ash wastes and down into the Arkham Underhive. The wastes are devoid of any major activity, and any kind of transportation would soon be noticed and reported. In particular, the waste nomads are thought to be working for Von Strab. As it is, a small group of us can masquerade as deserters to gain entry to the hive if we are discovered. That's hundreds of kilometers across barren wasteland, says Finn. We're never going to survive on foot. We've got no food or water, no environment protection gear or camping equipment. We wouldn't survive the first dusk. That has already been considered. He turns to Erasmus. You were given something when you sent your orders to report to here, I believe. Standing, Erasmus reaches inside his jacket and pulls free a thick neck chain with 3 large brass keys hanging from it. He steps forward to hand them to the colonel, but Schaefer backs away and waves a hand to the door leading to the room. It is time to assume your new office, says the colonel. Erasmus walks over to the door, glancing back at the lock. He picks a key and inserts it. It turns with a heavy click, and with a short push, Erasmus opens the door. A dark void lies beyond. As he steps through, lights begin to flicker into life from a high ceiling, and we stand and crowd through the door after him. As glow strips illuminate the chamber, they reveal row after row of high shelf units, stretching across the large warehouse. The storeroom is full of supplies. Just from the door, I can see ammo boxes, stacks of blankets, power pack charges, thousands of ration cartons. What is this? I asked the colonel, walking right into the warehouse and gazing in wonder at the stacked shelves receding 15 meters to left and right. When the Department Minatorum withdrew from the Diablo Mountains, there was a certain oversight of its stock record, says the colonel, prompting a gasp from Erasmus. An oversight? The scribe says, but that's impossible, isn't it? No, not impossible, says Schaefer, and especially possible if certain documents are requisitioned and classified by the Inquisition. The Inquisition? I say, instantly suspicious. I knew it had to be too good to be true. Nothing's ever straightforward when an inquisitor is involved. The Inquisition has had a strong presence on Armageddon, says the colonel, as we walk between the shelves of the stores. Given the nature of most of its activities, it is only prudent for them to maintain facilities and resources overlooked by normal channels. Lucky for us, I mutter, picking up an empty autogun magazine and pretending to examine it. Erasmus is pacing back and forth in small steps, looking around with wide eyes. The Inquisition? He says, his voice quiet with odd reverence. This all belongs to the Inquisition? I notice that most of the others are also walking around with the same sort of expression. I'd forgotten that for all but a few, the Inquisition is a little more than a myth. Sometimes a shadowy threat, used to elicit obedience from children and adults alike. Other times it is composed of secret heroes who hold the power of the Imperium in the palms of their hands. My experience has been slightly different. My dealings with them in the last two missions have led me to believe that they are overly paranoid, political, and quite possibly power-hungry. Their open mandate to protect the Emperor and the Imperium from any threat, by whatever means deemed necessary, is so vulnerable to abuse, I have to wonder who it is who watches the protectors of humanity. I then realize that Laurie is watching the colonel carefully, and Ohebs is paying him a lot of attention. I remember that they were working closely with Inquisitor Oriel before they joined the colonel, and they both look slightly nervous with this talk about the Inquisition. I suspect they have seen things and done things that most people would never want to know about. It does not belong to anyone, says the colonel. Officially, this place does not exist. That is the point. But doesn't that mean if we take anything, we will be looting? Says Spooge, shaking the magazine from my hands and carefully placing it on the shelf. I can't be party to looting, can I? I mean, if everybody thought they could just help themselves to stores, where would we all end up? I stroll along the next set of shelves, which are stacked far above my head, with ammunition cases, bolter ammunition by the looks of it. I can just about understand the Inquisition's motives here, I say. A potentially renegade Imperial commander has thrown his lot with alien invaders. Yes, that's very much their bag. What I can't understand is us, being here. The colonel gives me a quizzical look, and I continue. Why the last chancers, I say. It took a lot of resource and clout to get us all the way over here from the Eastern Fringe. Now, I know you've got a good record of success, but I can't believe we're the only ones who could do this. The colonel looks thoughtful for a moment before trying to work out if he should answer and how much he can tell us. Several attempts have already been made to ascertain the loyalty of von Straub, he says slowly. They have proved unsuccessful. Other agents and organizations have also made attempts on the Imperial commander's life, and I expect news of their failure. They have been unable to provide any accurate intelligence. But why us? I say insistently. With the Inquisition involved, I'd like to know what you've gotten us into. It is just a mission, the colonel says, his expression sharp with anger. News of our success with the Bright Sword operation was recognized by individuals in the hierarchy of the Inquisition, and the decision was made to give me the opportunity to effect an attempt. Cage has got a point, says Kindrug, walking just ahead of the group. He stops and turns, arms crossed. A full assault on Archeon wouldn't work. I can see that. But there are all kinds of specialist forces on Armageddon. What about the Space Marines, for instance, or stormtroopers? I would think they would probably do a pretty successful raid to take out this von Straub. Any kind of regular forces are out of the question, the colonel says, staring flatly at Kindrug. The Inquisition is doing all that it can to suppress knowledge of von Straub's personal army. If this information were to become more widely known, it would lead to uncertainty at best, and at worst, we would be facing the possibility of mass desertions, even fighting among our own ranks. Our efforts here cannot tolerate such a situation. Even the intervention by non-line forces would cause questions to be raised. Their absence from the fighting for any period of time would be noticed and have to be accounted for, as would any failure of them not to return. I get it now, says Brownie. Nobody knows we're here, so nobody's going to miss us when we're dead. Is that it? That is one way of looking at it, yes, says the colonel, resuming his walking. The other is that there has been no chance of us developing any kind of pro-liberation sympathies. We have been free of exposure to the propaganda put out by von Straub. What if we fail, says Laurie, casting a sideways glance at me. I'm not sure whether the look is one of accusation or seeking support. I keep my expression blank. I have already spoken of the potential disaster to the war effort if von Straub is indeed a traitor and allowed to continue, the colonel says, looking away. He seems uncomfortable with the questioning, but he's not got much choice. This is part of the mission where everything hangs in the balance for him. Up until now, we've had no choice but to follow his orders. They have been backed up by the full force of the Imperium, from the commissariat provosts on the ship to the Imperial Guard we've been amongst since reaching Cerberus Station. Now there's nothing except discipline and his own force of will to stop us simply walking away. We're covert, so nobody knows we're here. Nobody's here to back him up. He can't threaten us anymore, so he has to get us to understand what it is we're doing and why we have no choice but to comply. You know what I mean, says Laurie. There's always a last resort, a fallback plan. What will happen if we can't take out von Straub? The colonel doesn't answer straight away. Instead, he looks at each of us. He has our full attention. Considering what is at stake, the Inquisition will use extreme measures to ensure that von Straub cannot turn the course of the war against us, he says, expression impassive. If we fail, they will have no choice but to ensure the complete destruction of Arkham Hive. But surely that would be a blow just as deadly, says Finn, if only for morale, which is everything in this war at the moment. Then we must not fail, the colonel says briskly, regaining his usual businesslike self. He turns to me. You will work with the armor scribe Spooge to draw supplies suitable for the remainder of the mission. I want every eventuality covered. Right, sir, I say. I look at the others and then sweep open my arms in a gesture that encapsulates the whole warehouse. Let's find out what we've got to play with.